Hello and welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. I'm Dustin, co-author of Politico's California Playbook, and I'll be your moderator today for part of our Race for the Governor 2026 series of candidate forums. And now let me tell you a little bit about our speaker. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa graduated from UCLA. He went on to become a major labor leader in Los Angeles and later president of the Southern California chapter of the ACLU. In the early 90s, he was elected to the California State Assembly and rose to the role of speaker. He then went on to serve as Los Angeles mayor for 2 terms. Please join me in welcoming Antonio Villaraigosa to the stage. Mayor Villaraigosa, please come on out. Hi. Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So I want to start with something that's in the news today. You launched a statewide commercial yesterday. This is your biggest ad buy of the campaign, a $2.1 million ad buy. And this is all about your ICE accountability plan. Tell me why this message, why now, why make this the biggest advertising blitz of your campaign so far?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and it's good to see you all here today, and I guess we're streaming as well. So hello to San Francisco and the Bay Area. Look, I've been involved in immigrant rights since I was 15 years old. I grew up in an English-speaking home. My father was an immigrant, but left when I was 5. So, my mom and we didn't speak Spanish in the home. But I always saw them, neighbors, working hard, playing by the rules. And felt compelled to do something about what I've never seen in my life. I have never in my life, and I've been here a long time, I've never seen ICE agents covered from head to toe, any law enforcement covered from head to toe, like the Ku Klux Klan, unidentified, walking in with assault weapons, which are weapons of war, arresting people violently, arresting more than 170 U.S. citizens, sending them, oftentimes when they could identify themselves, in detention centers that are an abomination, many of them, too cold, not enough food, children not being cared for. And so I felt compelled to do this ad. From my vantage point, this is the United States of America, and we still have a Constitution. We have a Bill of Rights. We have rights in this country that have been violated daily by these people. So I felt compelled to do something about it and speak to it. Before that, I was mostly focused on the issue of affordability, but did this commercial for the purpose of saying that here in California, we're going to stand up for the Constitution and for the Bill of Rights.
And let's talk more about your ICE accountability plan. How far do you think the next governor can go in terms of limiting the federal immigration raids? What are some of the key points that you would pursue in that plan?
Well, look, we can't get the National Guard to stop them. We can't get our law enforcement to stop them in these actions. But we can say you have to follow the law in California. We can say, as an example, and they already have, that you should wear masks without identification when you're arresting people. We can say that you can't go into schools, hospitals, courthouses. We can pass laws that protect the health and safety of children in detention centers and adults. We can inspect those facilities. There are a number of things, and I've laid them out, and those are some of what I've laid out that we'll do. Some of them will be through executive order and then through legislation. The red states love doing that when there's a Democratic president. And those laws have been enforced when they've done that, and we intend to do the same.
Building on this question, the 9 Democrats in this race have really emphasized the different ways they would resist President Trump if they were elected. How do you think your strategy to that sort of resistance posture would be different from Governor Newsom, who's so often, focused on this kind of more combative trolling presence on social media? Would you do something similar, or how would you differ? Yeah.
Well, we did this 3 weeks ago, if you remember, here in San Francisco
We were at Manny's a couple weeks ago and had a similar conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And look, I'm not going to troll Donald Trump. I'm not going to, use memes to make fun of him, but we will enforce our laws. I've said from the beginning that the next governors should be able to chew gum and rub their tummy at the same time. We've got big problems that we've had long before Donald Trump. The challenge of homelessness, the challenge of schools, health care, clean streets. There are a lot of problems we have, and I intend to focus on them. But yes, we will hold ICE agents and Donald Trump accountable to California's laws and California's values. With respect to memeing and all of that stuff, that's not my shtick.
Yeah.
It's not something I'm going to do, but we will push back, and we need to.
And if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like a part of what you're saying is that the focus needs to be more on the state's problems than sort of the resistance mantra. Am I hearing you right on that?
Well, look, we'll do both.
Sure.
We'll focus on the problems we have, and they're big problems. But we'll also push back on raids, on efforts to, suing us for $1 billion, the UCs and my alma mater, UCLA. No, we're going to push back on the aids to fire victims in Los Angeles. We're going to push back. We still haven't gotten that FEMA money. It's tens of billions of dollars. He's targeting us across the board. And everywhere he targets California, the governor, the legislature needs to stand up. And I will. And what I've said is, as you've heard me, who better to do that than someone who came out of the civil rights movement long before I was in the legislature, a former labor leader, someone who understands that this country during the civil rights era made the kind of changes we made because we developed a mass movement. And if you recall, in the last session, I said, we need to enforce our laws. We need to use the ballot box, Prop 50, but we also need to build that movement. And you've seen it across the country. Those courageous people in Minneapolis, frankly, have inspired the nation. And it certainly inspired me. And I believe that we're going to have to build that movement to defend our democracy, to stand up for the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech on our campuses, all of the things that this administration has either violated or tried to interfere with.
You talked about the fires in Los Angeles, and it was just a couple of weeks ago that the EPA administrator in Trump's administration, Lee Zeldin, he said something about effectively California's efforts and LA's efforts to get aid would do better if Gavin Newsom weren't part of it because he's attacking the president so often. How does California deal with an administration like this that ties things like disaster relief to politics in that way?
They don't have to like Gavin Newsom. They don't have to like me. At the end of the day, if people were victimized in a fire, in the Palisades and Altadena in the way that they were, and they're due compensation and remuneration, that's the only thing the federal government, those are the two things they have to look at. Whether they like him or not, like me or not, or like San Francisco or LA. Yeah. That's not relevant to any of that. But they've done that again and again and again. They've done that with Medi-Cal, with healthcare rather. They've done that across the board. Education, they think that they can just say, you're a blue state, you didn't vote for me, so you don't get federal resources. That's unacceptable. Nobody's ever done that before, by the way, everybody. Been around long enough to know that. Democrats haven't done it, Republicans haven't done it, and no one should do it. But this man obviously doesn't believe in the rule of law and believes everything is personal. If you do a tweet about him, you're on the other end of him. We're going to stand up for our values.
And since we're on the topic of the fires, Los Angeles is your town. You were mayor for 2 terms.
I want my San Francisco to be my town too. Okay, I love San Francisco.
And you've been up here an awful lot lately.
I have.
But you know, given the slow pace of recovery and the way this has blown up in Mayor Bass's reelection campaign, now with some unexpected challengers, what do you think the state's role is to help LA and the county start making that rebuild happen in earnest?
Well, I think the governor has, and the legislature have made efforts to do that and are continuing to do that. I don't take umbrage with anything that they've done up to now. Look, there were 100-mile-an-hour winds. In the newspapers, they continually say that in 2012, the city. It's really interesting. In 2012, the city deployed assets in the Palisades during, fire warning, high winds. I was the mayor at the time. They didn't say the mayor did it, even though I did allocate those resources. Here, they said the mayor didn't. When I allocated those resources, it was because the fire chief recommended it, and I, of course, approved it. The fire chief did not recommend it to the mayor. That's a difference. She's not an expert. Now, I'm not in any way defending some of the things that didn't happen in Los Angeles, but what I am saying, these were 100-mile-an-hour winds. It was a conflagration that happened that, in what used to be once in a 100-year event, and now maybe once in a decade.
And I don't want to take the focus too much off the governor's race, but just real quick while we're talking about it, have you talked with Mayor Bass? I mean, do you feel like it sounds like maybe you think maybe she's gotten a little bit of an unfair shake in the way this has all been portrayed?
I talk to her all the time. I've known her for, more than 2/3 of my life. We both grew up in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
I've been supportive of her. She's been supportive of me. So I talk to her all the time. I do think there are things that have been misrepresented. And I also think there are things that she's been criticized for that she's accepted responsibility for.
Let's shift gears to the state's fiscal picture here. And one issue that's really been dominant in the debate in this race and state at the Capitol in Sacramento this year has been this concept of a wealth tax, a billionaire's tax. And you were one of the first in the field that really came out vocally.
I was the first.
The first.
For months.
Back.
When we all talked to SEIU in September, everybody was for it except for me. And what I said was, look, do I believe that people who make that kind of money should pay more than the rest of us? Absolutely. But that should be done at the federal level, not at the state level, and I'll tell you why. One, it's a one-time tax. It doesn't address the ebb and flow and the reason why we either have feast or famine. And again, I'm the only person that's had to balance the budget at the state. I was Speaker of the California State Assembly right after Willie Brown, my mentor. But what I can tell you is I was against it because they're just going to leave. They're already leaving. They've been leaving for some time. So I was against it. Once the CTA was against it, and they're against it because they have another tax that they want to put on the ballot, and that's making permanent the 13%. So everybody was for the 13%, making permanent, and also the billionaire tax. Once the CTA was against the billionaire tax, now they're all against it. I've been against it from the beginning. I know how to balance a budget. When I was Speaker of the Assembly, I balanced two budgets, one when we had 42 votes with a Republican governor, and the next year with a Democratic governor when we had 48. We didn't have the supermajorities that they did. We had to work together. We had to resolve these problems. And I'm old school. I think you shouldn't spend more than you got, kind of like you do at your kitchen table or you do it for your business. With respect to the upper income tax, making it permanent, I was also opposed to that, except for what I said was I could support it if we have a spending plan that demonstrates to the public we're going to live within our means. Jerry Brown left us, another former San Francisco resident, left us with a $300 million surplus. You know, off and on, we've had big deficits in this state. We would have had an $18 billion deficit, except for the AI boom, cut it down to 3. The LAO says next year it's $18 to $30 billion. You're not going to resolve it, certainly with a billionaire tax, because most of that money is going, in fact, almost all of it is going to healthcare. So we're still going to have a big nut to crack, if you will. So, I believe that the next governor is going to have to be a lot more like Jerry Brown, a grown-up, and say no.
Sure.
And make the tough decisions. You know, you mentioned mayor. When I was mayor, Wall Street said LA was, we had the worst recession since the 1930s. The COVID period was a little worse, except all the cities and counties and states got money from the federal government. I got zero. I had to make really tough decisions. Wall Street downgraded us and said LA was going bankrupt. I said, not under my watch. We did not go bankrupt. I resolved almost all of that deficit, left a tiny amount for the next mayor, by the way, that was never resolved since then. And even though they had much better times, I put 270,000 people to work in building, working on the subway, 3 light rail lines, 1 busway. Gavin Newsom made me infrastructure czar because as he said, the one thing he could never say last time was that he built more infrastructure than me or drew down more federal money. So what I've said is the next governor is going to have to make those kind of tough calls. I had to do things I never ran on, I didn't want to do, but I had to do it in order to keep us on a sound financial footing. And that's kind of basic to being governor. And I'm the only one that's ever been a chief executive. They interviewed us the other day. One person, they asked, how many people have you supervised? One person said 150, another said 50, another said a couple of dozen. I said 50,000 people. I mean, I had a job that, LA's bigger than some 42 states and at the end of the day, I had to make a lot of tough decisions.
I want to go back to the other tax question potentially facing voters this year that you mentioned, which is the extension of Prop 55, which is the sales tax on upper income earners to fund largely education. That's separate from the billionaire's tax.
It's not a sales tax, it's a...
Income tax. Sorry, yeah, thank you. Income tax on higher earners, separate from the billionaire's tax. How do you feel about that tax, though? Do you think that is more, is that more palatable in your thinking?
I'm sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I said, I'm against it if we're just going to make it permanent and not put a spending plan together.
Sure.
I said I could support it, kind of like when Brown sold it. He put a spending plan together. He laid out all the things he was going to, cut, all the changes he was going to make. I think that's what, people who work hard every day, deserve. You got to be able to, if I supported it, and I could, but only if we put a spending plan that demonstrates we're going to live within our means. If you look at the Think Long is an organization that was looking at our broken tax system. And it says it's broken because we over-rely on the upper income tax. We're the only state, one of the few states that doesn't have a service tax. Texas and Florida and a lot of red states have a much bigger property tax and more on corporate than on homeowners, much bigger property tax than they do income tax, because people can leave and property doesn't. And there are a lot of smart people, academe, people, former electeds who put this together, and all the folks say that's something we ought to do. In the last race, both Gavin and I said that we would support something like that. And, hasn't happened.
You just haven't seen that with Prop 55 extension.
Because you're going to take a lot of arrows. And that's the other thing. I'm not running for president, everybody. I was president of the Conference of Mayors. I was speaker, mayor of the largest city in California, larger than San Francisco, Oakland, San Diego, and San Jose combined. A city of more poverty, a poverty akin to the rate of poverty of Fresno, but also great wealth. A city, the epicenter of the undocumented in the country. It wasn't an easy city to lead, but in these jobs, you got to make the tough calls. And as I said, it passed me by. I'm not running for president. I want to be governor. I want to put us back on track. I tell people, I'm not with the people falling off the flat earth they believe in on the right, or people stuck with their heads in the clouds looking for pie in the sky. I'm a grown-up. I've had big jobs. And the one thing I know, there are things that are basic. Safety is basic. You all demonstrated that in your last election. And by the way, when I was mayor, LA was the most violent big city in the United States of America. By the time I left with New York, it was the safest big city in America. There were years that per capita in LA, where there's a lot more poverty, we were per capita safer than San Francisco. And what I tell people, I did those things because I know safety's the basics. 1 out of 3 schools were failing when I became mayor. The San Fernando Valley, which is like the epicenter of the middle class in LA, wanted to secede from the school district. By the time I left, it was 1 out of 10 failing schools, not 1 out of 3, a 60% increase in the graduation rate. So, those are the basics. Safety, schools, healthcare, clean streets, cities and a state that works and that, isn't perennially in the red.
You have been mayor of the largest city in the state. You were Speaker of the Assembly. You've had roles that no one else in the race has had.
President of the Conference of Mayors, chairman of the convention in 2012 for Obama.
In particular, I'm thinking about when it comes to your background in balancing the state budget. What you talked about some of the structural problems in terms of our tax setup in California. What do you think is some of the most low-hanging fruit in terms of getting the state balanced with its structural deficit, like you talked about in the next year or two? What would be your first kind of focuses in that sense?
There's no low-hanging fruit. And I'll tell you why. There's an interest group for everything we spent. And some of them are very powerful. I came out of, at 15 years old, I got behind the farm workers boycott. I was a retail clerk. I was chief steward, and president of a 5-state local when I was 25 years old. I ran for national president of the American Federation of Government Employees. I worked for SEIU and I worked for the teachers. But I said, as an example, all the candidates supported it. I said that I can't support people going on a strike and getting unemployment benefits. Why? Because our unemployment fund is $1 billion underfunded, number one. And imagine if you had, certain sectors of employees on strike getting unemployment benefits. Could I be for unemployment benefits for very low wage workers, possibly. Non-public, possibly. But there are a lot of things that we're going to have to look at. You work with the LAO, with the staff. I didn't know before the recession came all of the things I was going to have to cut, but I'll tell you, there were no sacred cows. I made decisions that, I had pickets in front of my home and in front of City Hall every single day for 3 years. And I tell people, you had to make the tough calls. At the end of the day, I'll tell you what's basic and should be protected. Healthcare is basic, safety is basic, and education is basic. And, infrastructure, spending on roads, highways, and those are basic things. And I don't have a list of things that I'm going to cut, but with a budget of a deficit of $18 to $30 billion, you can expect that almost everything is going to be impacted. It's just a fact. Now, we do need to look at the revenue issue. I want you to look at the PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California. They did a study. This is the toughest state to do business in the United States of America, and anybody who has a business will tell you that. It just is. Now, the PPIC report says we actually roughly oversee or regulate the same number of industries as a red state. And I'm just going to give you numbers because paraphrase.
Sure.
I don't remember the exact numbers. But if a red state regulates 8 things in that industry, a purple state might do 25, 40. A blue state, 75, 80, 90. California, 300. Go read it. We've got to unleash the entrepreneurial and the innovative, spirit of California. We're the home of AI, tech, biomed. We've got to figure out how we make it easier, particularly for small business. Democrats used to say it was workers and small business. Now we treat small business the way we treat large multinational corporations. And, I'll give you an example, farming. In the last farming, the regulatory cost per acre, according to the Farm Bureau, was $160 an acre. Now it's $1,600. It's like you keep on adding regulations and red tape on people, and they're suffocating. So we've got to unleash that. We have the brains of AI, tech, and biomed, but the brawn is leaving us.
Okay.
In no small part because of an overregulated environment. And I'm a Democrat, but I knew when I was cutting, when I was mayor, I was also growing business. LA went from 20,000 to 60,000 people living downtown. Why? It was safe, and we were bringing in business. And now, there's not a crane in the city of LA, not one.
When it comes to your concerns about overregulation, and you're talking about that, how that harms the revenue base and the state budget picture, but another area where I've heard you talk a lot about that is when it comes to energy prices. The way you talk about energy, climate is so much different than the other Democrats in the race, or most of them anyway. In particular, you really stress your concern about refineries closing, and you have a plan to help prevent future refinery closures. Why is that so important to you, and why do you think you're different than the other Democrats on that issue?
I'm going to answer the question, but I want to... Okay. When we lost the election in November, Democrats were saying inflation is down. People, working families, middle-class families, were saying, I don't know the difference between inflation and cost of living, but I know my cost of living is up. And so a big portion of them didn't come with us. A big portion of working people, not, unions included. I mean, union members, not the unions. So when you look at cost drivers, we have the highest gas prices in the United States of America, everybody. We produce the cleanest fuel, I know, at least in the United States of America. Some people argue the cleanest fuel in the world. We've closed 3, because of over-regulation, we've closed 3 refineries, one of them just across the bay.
Yeah.
SC says, doing a study, if we close 1 more refinery, gas prices are going to $8.75 a gallon. So when people have said you're defending refineries, I said, hold it. I'm defending people that drive a Ram pickup and have to go 2 hours from Stockton to the Bay Area to work, or from Moreno Valley or Riverside to LA or Orange County. We're putting all of this on the backs of working families who just can't afford it. I stopped last June putting a coalition together, the AQ, Southern California Air Quality Management District. I've been very supportive of them for the entire time in public life. They were about to get rid of gas stoves, gas water heaters, at a cost that, people just can't afford. And so what I said to people, let's build the grid. We take longer to build our grid than any of the Western states. All electric cars, we built 167,000 charging stations in 10 years. We need 2 million more in the next 10 years. And if we built them tomorrow, we don't have the grid. So let's build the grid. So what I'm saying is, by the way, Governor made me infrastructure czar, as I said, for a reason. I built more infrastructure than anybody in the United States in my 8-year period, including Bloomberg in his 8-year period of time. More than anyone in the United States. So what I've said is, let's build again. Let's build the electric grid before we start, closing down refineries. And there's a new proposal the legislature in their wisdom is going to study. They want to do vehicle miles traveled. You saw that, right?
Mileage.
Mileage.
Yeah.
So you should be taxed based on the mileage, of your commute. Well, hold it. Who commutes the longest? White-collar workers are working from home, a lot of them. The people that go the longest commutes are the people that are the poorest. And so what I said is, if you want to do that for electric cars, you should, but don't include the gas-driven cars. They're already paying a gas tax and exorbitant gas prices. What we've lost, everybody, is a little common sense. These are all good things. And by the way, what we didn't say, so I convoluted answer, I had a 100% record in the legislature when I was, according to the California League of Conservation Voters, on the environment. I'm the author of the Kara-Moyer Act, which was an effort to retrofit dirty diesel engines. It's the biggest effort to clean up the air since the Clean Air Act until AB 32 and SB 32, the far-reaching environmental bills that we passed. When I was mayor, #1 American city in reducing carbon emissions, #5 in the world, nearly a 30% drop in emissions. We used the same amount of water that we did in 1970 when we reduced our water consumption to when we had 1 million less people. Every trash truck is CNG. I was the guy at the RTD board, the second largest bus fleet in the country, that made every bus clean fuel vehicles. We've got to do all of that. But you can't do it in a way where you're driving working people in the middle class to a man who believes that we should drill, baby, drill, and, it's just oil and gas. I am not that person, but I am someone who knows a little bit about this, and because I do, I've taken positions different than the rest of my colleagues.
And one example of that really jumps out to me is during the last debate with you and most of the Democrats. One Republican was there, and in a lightning round, they asked who would continue Gavin Newsom's plan to phase out the sale of new gas cars by 2035. The Republican, of course, said he would not continue it, and you were the only Democrat that gave a definitive no answer. I gather from what you just said, you think we're just not ready for that transition. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. First of all, when they first passed it, I was all in. Assuming that with it, we were going to build a grid, that we were going to build the charging stations. In the last 6 years, we've built 167,000 and we need 2 million. So yes, I said no. By the way, they only let you say yes and no. You can't explain your answer.
Right.
And I was one of 2 people that answered the yes or no question every time. Everybody else equivocated and gave a long answer. And that, there were rules, and the rules was you got to say yes or no. I've explained it. Of course I was for it. And am I for it when we build the grid? Absolutely. The way to be for it when you build a grid is to build the grid. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, the way to be for that goal is to build the grid. And that's the difference. They're setting goals that sound great, and they're not doing anything to make those goals happen.
But the politics on this issue, energy, climate, has been a little bit tough for you in the primary, in the sense that the issue you've probably been attacked the most about has been the contributions you've taken from oil and fossil fuel companies throughout your political career. Do you want to respond?
The vast majority when I was Speaker of the California State Assembly, and that's what speakers do, as all of you know, you take contributions and you give them to your members to run. And but like I said, what's absolutely clear is I have a record second to none, including Steyer. There is nobody that's done as more in the legislature and as mayor in this country on climate change, bar none. Not a one of them, except for maybe voting for stuff, have done any of this. And what we did, perfect example. In addition to what I just said that we did, we had more LEED certified buildings than anybody in the country. Planted 400,000 trees, more than anybody in the country. I didn't get to 1 million. I promised 1 million. The recession came. But so did Bloomberg, so did Denver, so did Houston. None of them got to 400,000. I was somebody focused on, I was vice chair of the Global 40, the cities taking on climate change. I am absolutely 100% believe that we have to take it on, but you take it on by more than just setting goals. You actually work to do it. So my issue is that we need an all-of-the-above strategy. Of course we need more renewables, which are solar and wind, but anybody who knows a little bit about this, and clearly some of them don't, is that they're peak load powers. So you only have wind when you have wind. You only have solar when you have sun. And if you don't have the battery power to keep it, we end up sending more solar for free to Arizona in the summer and 2 cents a kilowatt more than we paid for it in the winter. That doesn't make sense. We've got to build that grid. So what do we need? We got to double down on battery power to make those 2 renewables base load powers, not peak load powers. We're going to need oil and gas for a period of time. There are technologies that we could use for carbon recapture at the refineries. And then finally, we've got to focus on the fact that if you're going to have data centers, and if we're ever going to get to net zero by 2045, you're going to have small nuclear. You just are. Europe everywhere is looking at small nuclear, which is a different technology than big nuclear. At the end of the day, if you want to go 100%, you got to build the infrastructure, and you need an all-of-the-above strategy. That's what I did on crime. I didn't just add 1,000 officers. We were at 9,000, took us to 10,000. They're now at 8,700. At the end of the day, I dramatically expanded after-school programs, dramatically expanded summer youth jobs. I had a prevention and intervention program that Obama took to Central America. So because I have been in these big jobs, I know it's ideology blocks your peripheral vision. You need to be able to have an all of the above strategy if you want to get to 100% net zero.
Okay. And let's shift gears and talk about just the state of this race and where you fit in. As I mentioned, there's 9 well-known Democratic contenders, and that could create a scenario. It's an unlikely scenario, but is a fear some people have that maybe 2 Republicans get through the primary. Even though that's unlikely, do you feel like there's too many Democrats still in this race to have 9 folks at this point? Yeah,
35% undecided. This race has been more difficult than the one with Gavin, and Gavin's a very talented guy. And I'll tell you why. At the end of the day, nobody's been watching this race. You and I were chatting about it back there.
Yep.
They're starting to watch it now. But for a year, we were all just meandering through the state, up and down, talking to, a few people, and it just 35% undecided.
Do you think that's because people are focused on Trump, or is that what you think?
Trump has taken the auction out of the air.
Okay.
Just out of the room rather.
Yeah.
So 35% undecided. Most of them Latino, moderates, and independents that vote Democrat, but in that lane, in that center lane. That's one. Number 2, I've been, all of us except for 3 people have been in single digits. In my case, 7 to 11, but on average 7 or 9. Some people way lower than that. 3 people, one at 16, Swalwell, Katie at 14, Steyer after spending $40 million now?
Yeah, around that, yeah.
Is that 10?
Okay.
So it's still within we're still in the hunt. I think 4 or 5 of us on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, the reason why that won't happen, 2 things. Each one of them have 16 votes. They're only 25%. Republicans are only 25% of the vote. They have 32. So they've split the independents that lean Republican. Mm-hmm. So, last time, if you remember, Gavin started at 33, I was at 3, narrowed it in late April, PPIC, he's at 24, I'm at 20. They spent $30 million, beat me up. And more importantly, Cox, who was the more moderate of the 2, Travis Allen was the more right wing, Cox got endorsed by Trump, and he went to 26 overnight. So I came in 3rd. So what happens? Trump is going to endorse somebody. And I don't know who. Bianco is an oath keeper and more right wing than Hilton, though they both are. Because the positions they're taking are not conservative. They're right. A lot of their positions are right wing. I think Trump will go with somebody, and then the other person will it'll be like 25 or 26, and the other one has 3. Yeah, that's kind of how it works. Yep. And so I think it will be a Republican and a Democrat. Obviously, the goal is to come in first. We're a long way from that. That's part of why. That's the other reason why I did those commercials.
Yeah.
I intend to get back in double digits to make sure that we get to flesh out these issues in a way that I think the voters of California deserve.
You mentioned the 3 Democrats that have led in the more recent polls, and then you've often either...
It's actually 2 of them. One of them just got to 10.
Yeah, Steyer entered the race later and has kind of jumped up as he spent all that money you mentioned. And then you've typically been in 4th or 5th place, sometimes trading places with Javier Becerra, the former health secretary, former AG. You and him have kind of been swapping depending on the poll, but you've only got about 4 months until the June 2nd primary. What is your path? I mean, what do you do to break out at this point?
Well, one of the things that's clear to us and everything just going up and down the state, Democrats believe this man is a threat to our democracy. These raids have them riled in a way I haven't seen in a very long time. And I want people to be clear. There's only one person in this race for more than 50 years has been fighting for them and understands, by the way, the position I've taken. It's not abolish ICE or, open borders. I've made it clear. Every country has a right to secure its borders. So do we. We ought to do so humanely. We shouldn't separate children from their parents. 2, violent criminals can and should go, but at the end of the day, what I tell people, the vast majority of people who have been arrested are not violent criminals. Does the U.S. government have a right to arrest them? Yes, but they should do so respecting the rule of law. Warrantless entries into homes and businesses is not the rule of law. The things, and so, that's a part of our strategy, that I'm speaking to that. And as I said, at the end of the day, campaigns are long. Let me give you an example. Gray Davis, in late March, was at 11. Mm-hmm. Harman was at 16, and Checky was at 18. Who won that race? When I ran against Hahn in 2001, I was Speaker of the Assembly. I was at 9. Becerra was at 9. Becerra came in after I did, like he did in this race. We were both at 9. Hahn was at 76. A year later, I beat him in the primary. Then in the runoff, I was up by 7 points in most polls, 11 points in one poll. 10 days later, he did an attack ad, and I lost by 7 points in 10 days. That's what happens in campaigns. So obviously, you saw me, I was on the phone, making calls.
Yeah.
You got to fund a campaign, and you got to do all of that. So it's wide open still. But that door's closing, so.
Mm-hmm. In the latest entrant to the race, and probably the last major person that's going to join this field, is the San Jose mayor, Matt Mahan, who's a moderate Democrat. And you had raised the most money total of the Democrats until he got in. He raised like $7 million in 1 week. A lot of
in 7 days.
Yeah, a lot of it was tech money, big, maxed out donors. You had been considered the most moderate Democrat in the race before he got in. Do you feel like you and him might be competing for a lane, or how are you thinking about that?
I think that moderate term in this state,
sure,
it's more of a common sense lane than a practical lane. Look, I'm terrified by the extreme right. And I learned a long time ago, as a college student, when I was way over here with pie in the sky, I learned a long time ago, when you lose the middle, you better look in the mirror. And we've lost the middle. And you saw it here in San Francisco. People said, I'm tired of this. You saw it on your school board. You're seeing that up and down the state. So yes, we're in a similar lane, but the difference is that's a city manager city. I was the city manager. The mayor there is like a council, and in a city manager-run city. But yes, we are taking a lot of the same positions, not all of the same, but some of them. I'd say particularly on safety and on homelessness. Difference is I got a record. Crime went down 48% under me.
The one issue I do remember where you disagree with him on homelessness is his plan that allows for arrest if people repeatedly refuse offers of shelter. Can you just address that real quick before we get to the audience questions?
I don't believe in criminalization. Yeah. I do believe in compassion. I don't believe in chaos. And when you're selling drugs in front of cops, That's chaos, and you can and should be arrested when you're doing that. Just being homeless, arrested, no, I don't agree with that. But I do believe this. If you're offered a bed and housing, you don't have a right to be homeless. You know, we love to say, here's again, and you won't hear a Democrat say this. All we say all the time is the reason we have so many mentally ill on the streets of California is because Ronald Reagan closed the mental institutions. Well, that's true. Actually, a lot of the country did because that was the movement then to close down and supposedly have local facilities. But yes, that's true. Well, Democrats have been in office for 28 years. Why haven't we opened one? I mean, at the end of the day, in the 1950s, you saw One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was too easy to put people in institutions. And now it's almost impossible. Gavin did the care courts. We've got to fund them, grow them. We've got to have mental health facilities, locked institutions for some people. When you have families trying to put a loved one in a mental institution, and they can't, and that happens all the time in California, they cannot, there's something wrong with that. I mean, they're not doing that because they don't love their loved one. They're doing that because they're a threat to themselves and others. And, you know, I was president of the ACLU, but I've disagreed with them from time to time. I do believe that some people belong in locked institutions with compassionate care, yes, with the resources that they need to hopefully get better. But, you know, what we have right now, it's not working. It's a beautiful town. And, you know, it's coming back.
Yep.
But, you know, a few years ago, I'd never seen San Francisco like that. And I've been coming here since I was a kid because I was a student leader and I'd come up and down, and high school even. And the same with LA. I mean, I've never seen it like that. And I've been here, I think with the last mayor before Karen, and part of why I decided to run, I said the following: I was born and raised here. I've never seen this city so dirty. I've never seen homelessness grow so rapidly. I've never seen crime grow so rapidly. It feels like Rome is burning and the city's adrift. And the mayor at that time was offended by it. I didn't mention him, and I said the whole darn city, the business community, everybody. What we've seen on the streets of California is it's not working. I tell people, what is humane about people living in their excrement? And the answer is nothing. So we should do something. We shouldn't criminalize. We should be compassionate. But yes, chaos doesn't work for anyone, including them. So that's the difference.
Well, thank you for that explanation. We've got some excellent audience questions and questions from the YouTube chat. So now we're going to turn
YouTube.
Now we're going to turn to your questions. Yeah, these are their questions from the cards.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one, we've seen California join international organizations such as the World Health Organization after the U.S. pulled out. As governor, do you believe there is merit to joining more international groups? And if so, which ones would you select?
Well, that was one of them. I think the federal government is going against world bodies that heretofore we have always been a part of and supported and oftentimes led the way. I don't have off the top of my head exactly which ones, but I could tell you we are a subnational government, and if our government is going to be taking positions that are not based in science, that are not evidence-based, yes, we should be a part of many of those organizations that create standards that have impact on us here in California.
And let's talk about housing construction. There's been a lot of swings with new legislation coming out of Sacramento in the last, 7, 8 years, but not a ton more housing constructions in a lot of places, with the exception of maybe the ADUs, the backyard cottages. What would you do to stimulate more development and construction?
Did you hear that question? They've been moving in the right direction. By the way, 6 years ago,
Yeah.
I was talking about all of the stuff they're doing now. Just like the refineries. By the way, what you didn't say, Sacramento's listening, so's the governor. They're all moving against, closing down these refineries because they know what the impact is. So I was the truth teller back then and a truth teller now. So a lot of what they've passed is in the right direction. You could sue for a project in Marin County from Phoenix, Arizona. A housing project, a building project.
Sure.
They don't have any standing. That's the other thing. Any lawyers listening? Okay. You don't have to have standing with the California Environmental Quality Act. You don't have to sue on environmental reasons. You can sue for a panoply of reasons, and people do. And that's why things are almost impossible to build here and cost so much. So what would I do? I'd actually implement those laws, number one. Novel concept because we're not doing it. And importantly, cut red tape, address zoning changes, focus not just on homeless housing, and we didn't get to that. The average unit for homeless housing in California is $850,000. Most of your kids couldn't afford an $850,000 home without your help, okay? That's the reality of today. In San Jose and in LA, building $100,000 small homes, also $850,000 ones. But so at the end of the day, we got to actually implement this stuff. As I said, I was a builder. I built more homeless housing in my 8 years in the middle of a recession than they did the 12 years beforehand, more market rate, affordable, and workforce housing than they did in the 12 years before. And I had, the worst recession. So I did this. They didn't have a recession like I did. And so, I think we got to roll up our sleeves and get the job done.
And yeah, like I mentioned, there have been a lot of bills that have passed, but just
Great bills.
If you look at the overall amount of cities that aren't meeting their housing goals, the numbers just haven't been there yet. Do you think it's a matter of time, a matter of implementation? Is that really, or do you think there needs to be more progress in terms of CEQA reform, bigger legislative bites at the apple?
Well, we got to do all of that. Let me give you an example. I love this town for food. Great town. I'd come up here. I'd go to Chicago. I'd go to New York. I'd go to Vegas or Miami. I'd see a great chef. Love your food. Thank you very much. They always come and say hello. And I'd say, I want you to come to Los Angeles. They said, I wouldn't come to Los Angeles if you paid me. Of course, I was Mayor of LA at the time. I'd get offended. What do you mean? And after the first few of them, I figured it out. It took us 2.5 years to open up a restaurant. I go back. I figure out what happened. We had 12 different departments that had to approve opening up a restaurant, and none of them talked to each other, and oftentimes took positions different, contrary to one another. So that's why people hire expediters and have to go and take 2.5 years.
Sure.
I took it down to 6 months.
Okay.
That's what we got to do with everything. I put dashboards on everything. You'll love this one. My inauguration, Gavin was there. It was 6,000 people there. We have a reception that night, or that afternoon, right after my inauguration. My chief of staff comes up to me and says to me, Mayor, we have a meeting. I said, there's thousands of people here, right? What do you mean we have a meeting? I'm greeting everybody. And I said, with who? And she said, with McKinsey. And I said, what's his first name? I didn't know McKinsey was a, management consulting group. I didn't know about Boston Consulting. But once I sat down with them, I hired a bunch of them to come in the city of Los Angeles. We had dashboards by every campaign promise. And that's what I'm going to do as governor. We have a law, and we say we're going to build X number of housing. We're going to put dashboards up, and these will be on the internet so you can see. I'll put dashboards across everything. It's how I accomplished as much, we accomplished as much as we did. We had people, metrics, and dashboards on everything we did, and that's what the next governor's going to have to do. You're not just somebody who's got a bully pulpit. You got to propose a budget. You got to implement that budget. You've got to govern, and there's nobody in this race that's ever done anything remotely close to it. And I think people got to think through that.
I think we've got time for just probably one more question. This is a very sensitive question, especially for a lot of labor groups in the state. What is your plan for the workforce disruption that AI is going to cause? How would you mitigate that?
I think Gavin and the legislature have tried to do a good job. There's no question there's a lot of trepidation, not just here in California, but around the country, about safety, about jobs, about children and their access to AI. And I think they've tried to have a balance. At the end of the day, AI's here. It's not going anywhere. But we saw some of the mistakes we made with tech, and particularly the social media platforms. And so I think the next governor is going to have to be vigilant, regulate with a soft hand unless and until you see issues that clearly need regulatory oversight. Regulatory control, rather. We already have the oversight. So I think they should be concerned. Though it's more, as an example, I know, truckers are concerned. People that drive vehicles are concerned. White-collar workers, lawyers are concerned. But some of it is going to happen without question, and some of it we're going to have to push back. What I've said is it's not good enough to say, well, they'll get retrained and, for a good job, comparable job. That's not happened historically. They make those cuts, and then these people go from $125,000, $150,000 job to working at Walmart. That doesn't work. We can't do that. You'll have a revolution, frankly. People will push back and push back hard. So yes, we're the home of all of that. We got to let it grow, but we also got to regulate it where it makes sense.
Okay. Well, that was our last question. Thank you so much for your time. Mayor, former Assembly Speaker Antonio Villaraigosa, thank you for a great discussion. And if you want more information about upcoming Commonwealth Club programs, please visit us at commonwealthclub.org. I'm Dustin Gardner. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you.